Indoctrination and fear are the two biggest pillars that cults use to keep their members going and keep their group going. And by the end of debunking this 1919 teaching of the Jehovah's Witnesses, we'll explore why it can only be fear and indoctrination that prevents someone from logically and critically thinking. Now, this article can be found on the jw.org website. It's from the Pure Worship of Jehovah book. And in teaching box 9B, entitled Why 1919, we're just going to skip through a couple of points from this article or from these paragraphs and debunk the 1919 teaching. And right off the bat, they say, why do we say that God's people are freed from bondage to Babylon the Great in 1919? A combination of Bible prophecy and the facts of history helps us arrive at that conclusion. Now, I can guarantee you that there are no scholars or anyone who is ordained or who has a degree in Bible chronology that would conclude the same as the Jehovah's Witnesses. But it is their doctrine, so they have to defend it. So it says, Bible prophecy and history show conclusively that Jesus began reigning as king in heaven in 1914, signaling the start of the last days of Satan's system here on earth. Absolutely no scripture backs this up. No scripture, no scholar, no scholarly works even hint toward this 1914 and 1919 teaching. Of course, we know it to be solely a Jehovah's Witness doctrine. But let's move on. In the next paragraph, they try to connect scriptures from 1 Peter and Malachi to help build upon their prophecy. It says that time would be a period of refinement and testing. Does history harmonize with those prophetic indications? It certainly does! ! So this part here where it says it certainly does, that's just Jehovah's Witness writing to try to convince you of something because they have absolutely no proof. And the reason why they have absolutely no proof is because the last 3 paragraphs of this article cite absolutely no scriptures. So they go on to talk about that time being difficult for the Bible students. And this is when Charles Taze Russell had died, and Rutherford and his associates were arrested, and so on and so forth. And it says, then in 1918, evidently, that's another word they use to try to convince the reader. Evidently, at the instigation of the clergy, Brother Rutherford and 7 of his associates were tried, wrongfully convicted, and sent to prison. Headquarters in Brooklyn closed down. Clearly, God's people were not yet freed from Babylon the Great. But what happened in 1919? Why, things turned around with almost dizzying swiftness. Early in the year, Rutherford and his associates were released from prison, and they got right back to work. Within short order, a landmark convention was planned, and the publication of a new journal, The Golden Age, now awake, was underway. So they are using the fact that Rutherford and his associates were arrested, wrongfully convicted, sent to prison, Brooklyn headquarters shut down, and that happened in 1918. But in 1919, things turned around because they were released from prison, went back to work, started the Golden Age, which I believe was a magazine that said that black people will once turn white in the new system, but that's a topic for another discussion. And this is evidence that points to Jesus ruling in heaven beginning in 1919. Absolutely no scriptures, nothing to back this up besides JW propaganda. But see, here is where critical thinking has to take over for a Jehovah's Witness to break free from that indoctrination and release their fears and really start to think for themselves. We're going to look at the July 2022 Watchtower Study Article 29, paragraphs 3. It says, Jesus is overseeing the preaching work. How can we be sure of that? Shortly before he ascended to heaven, Jesus met with a number of his faithful followers on a mountain in Galilee. He told them, "All authority has been given me in heaven and on earth." Note his very next statement, "Go therefore and make disciples of people of all the nations." So among other things, Jesus has been given the authority to direct the preaching work. So a Jehovah's Witness could be sitting in their Sunday meeting during this Watchtower article, raise their hand, comment to the question, "What authority has Jesus been given?" Repeat this entire paragraph or put it in their own words, and not for 1 second think about that doctrine that they have sitting on the shelf of 1919. Because in this scripture here at Matthew 28, 18 and 19, it says, "All authority has been given me in heaven and on earth." So why would Jesus begin teaching or ruling rather in heaven at 1919 when authority had already been given to him both in heaven and on earth from the scripture here at Matthew 28, 18 and 19? Was he granted authority twice? See, the Jehovah's Witness cannot think for themselves. Even if they thought about this and they raised their hand and asked a question to the conductor, all hell would break loose because it doesn't fit what the article is saying versus what the 1919 teaching is saying. See, there's always some sort of loophole that they would use to get out of conflicting or converging ideas, because there's no way you can read Matthew 28, 18 and 19 and reconcile that Jesus was given authority in 1919 to rule over or to be the head of the Jehovah's Witness organization. So first comes the indoctrination, where the cult members learn the core doctrines, the core beliefs that they had no part in deciding upon. They have to accept them as the current teachings unless the leaders, such as the governing body or whatever other cult leaders are in charge, until they change the doctrine, this is the current doctrine. So the 1919 teaching has to be what you believe if you want to be a Jehovah's Witness. Now, if suddenly they get new light, even though you may have thought about these scriptures going against the doctrine, until they give it to you as new light or change their stance, you're not allowed to speak about it. Or you're not allowed to doubt or ask questions because it doesn't make sense to you. Now, indoctrination would be consuming these doctrines, of course, and not being able to go against them. But it's the fear that's really keeping the cult members in a state of mind control. Because remember, even if you think that you have better ideas than the cult leaders, you can't speak against it for fear of losing your family, losing your friends, and of course, if you're preemie, physically and mentally, and you really believe that you can die at Armageddon for being labeled an apostate or being disfellowshipped before the end comes. So this is really difficult for cult members, and it's something that really puts them back into a state of listen and obeying, because until you can free your mind and think for yourself and ask questions and seek the answers, your mind is really trapped in a box and you won't be able to get out. However, for someone who would like to help questioning Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or whatever the cult may be, finding, if they are a Bible believing cult, finding scriptures that go against doctrine and simply asking questions, how could it be that Jesus was granted authority way back in the time of the scripture being written in Matthew, but we have this 1919 teaching, and clearly there are no scriptures backing up this Rutherford and his associates miraculous release from prisons. No scriptures back this up as being prophecy or tied to 1919 in no way. So how can we reconcile the two? And hopefully these little questions that you pose to someone who is potentially questioning or may entertain those types of thoughts at the time, perhaps it will help them. But I'm a big believer in people needing to be ready to wake up before they're woken up, because forcing someone to wake up doesn't really work. Someone has to be ready for that. And I think it's really a subconscious thing, to be honest, because once you start spilling the beans about the truth, they really fight back and push back. I don't even think it's something that they could control. I think they're tapped into a frequency, or they're on the download where it's really not going to be helpful. So someone has to be ready, and that's why those who are PMOs or those who are ex-JWs or ex-Mormon or whatever the case may be have to be ready with mind-boggling questions that can help someone wake up. So fear and indoctrination, that is what's keeping your family members, your friends being tied to a cult. So hopefully you are able to learn something from what I've shared today, and I'll be talking to you soon. Thank you for listening.
You see, fear is a powerful weapon in the hand of our great adversary, Satan the devil. He will use that weapon against us. And what is the danger? You see, brothers, when we are afraid or we are terrified, we can then be controlled by our enemies. You see, people who are in fear of death are constantly afraid. And as a result, they can be manipulated and controlled.